Welcome to Newton's Macabre Tales. To find more free short stories, visit www.newtonwebb.com with 2 B's. The Heir Apparent by Newton Webb. 29th of April, 2022, London. Keith looked down at his phone. A text message blinked back at him from his mother. What did they say? Did you get a job? He swiped ignore and nervously took a champagne flute from a black-suited waiter. The room was filled with white-clothed tables arranged with crystalware and filled with exotic dishes. The guests were impeccably dressed, if somewhat old-fashioned. Every hair was in place, every suit pressed, every tie knotted perfectly. But then, he'd expect nothing less from the upper management and investors of the Lion Group. Keith looked down at his suit from Primark. At least it fits me well. Light jazz music played, just staying audible over the sounds of ribald celebration. Alfred Winterton stood near the stage. His suit might be almost identical to the grey men surrounding him, but his presence dominated the group. A large, beaming smile spread across his face as he laughed and talked with his guests. His wife, Vivienne, stood to the side of him. Keith remembered her. She'd been a professional model and actress in her 20s. Now, at 60, she was still a fashionable woman. Her black evening gown offset her blonde hair. He remembered her as being the only one of the Wintertons who didn't look down on him. Keith timidly sipped his champagne. The liquid bubbled in his throat. He'd only seen the Wintertons a few times, at weddings and funerals. His grandmother was Alfred's estranged sister, and he'd never quite fitted in with his loud, confident cousins. Worse? He turned to see Jeremiah addressing him. Keith looked straight into his cousin's red-tinted glasses, the small round spectacles giving him an almost vampiric gleam. My God, it's you, Worse! Look at you in your... Did you actually buy that suit from a shop? Jeremiah poked it. You look like an estate agent's. Is that polyester? Jeremiah's suit was tailored so tightly it clung to him like a second skin. Hello, Jeremiah, Keith said with a forced smile. It's really good to see you again. We'd assumed you died. Jeremiah tapped his shoulder, leading him over to where a group of young siblings were standing and laughing. They watched curiously as he approached. Hey, everyone! It's the original soy boy, Wuss! Don't be a jerk, Jerry, Jeremiah's brother Harold said. Where Jeremiah was lean, Harold was a great red bacchanalian wineskin of a man. He clinked Keith's glass happily. How are you doing? We haven't seen you for years. Is Auntie Susan still crusading to free the cows? His jowls jingled with the enthusiasm of a man who has not held back on the wine. She is a vegan, yes. She doesn't really crusade, though. Mostly just reads books. Keith smiled nervously. She doesn't know I'm here. Oh, you scoundrel, Wuss! Jeremiah's eyes lit up. Sassing your own mother! Good man! Keith shifted awkwardly. I was hoping I could get a job, learn how it works in a city. There isn't much to do on my mother's farm. 2 simple words for you, Keith. Cocaine! Jeremiah confided. That's 1 word, you idiot. Harold laughed through a smoked trout blini. Bits of dough dribbled down to his chins. Keith reached for a mini Yorkshire pudding, then seeing the roast beef in it, retracted his hand. Wait, you want to be a city boy, but you're still vegan? Jeremiah called out to the crowd. Can you credit him? Scattered polite laughter followed. Oh, I missed this. I am getting you a job, Wuss. In fact, you're going to work for me directly. I'm going to teach you what it means to be a city boy. Oh, you don't need a... I'll work anywhere, really, Keith started. Harold clapped him on the back. "Stick with us, Keith. We're going to make you filthy rich." "Disgustingly rich," Jeremiah embellished. "Father is going to announce me as the CEO, and then we're going to celebrate." On cue, the tinkling of a teaspoon on a champagne flute caught everyone's attention, and the room fell silent. A grey-haired older man ascended the podium. The music slowly died down. "Thank you for attending." Alfred ascended the podium. The music slowly died down. "Thank you for attending. I will keep this short so you can get back to drinking all of my champagne." Around him, the crowd laughed. 50 years ago, I founded the Lion Group. In that time, we've made a lot of rich people considerably richer." A cheer sounded around the room. He wafted it away. "I've always had a way with numbers. I've always seen the connections between them. Growing portfolios is like breathing for me." He paused and looked down at the audience. Jeremiah moved to the side of the podium. "Which is why, after much deliberation, I have made the hard decision to stay on as CEO. I want to reassure everyone that after the recent turbulence, we will return to our traditional roots and values." Jeremiah froze next to the wooden podium, a sickly grin on his face. As everybody applauded, he flinched, his expression spreading as he slowly joined in with the clapping. His father whispered into his ear, and Jeremiah nodded politely before returning to Harold and Keith. Harold peered across his wineglass at his brother. Did you know? Jeremiah visibly fumed through his fixed grin. His expression, complete with bulging eyes, had morphed into more of a friendly snarl. "Of course I didn't know! Let's get the hell out of here! I need a bump. You too, wuss!" He turned to one of his staff. "Get a car waiting outside." Oh, I need to get my coat," Keith said. "Fucking leave it!" Jeremiah stopped and blinked at him. "Why would you even own a coat?" The boys were up in the loft, a private terrace overlooking the main nightclub at Babylon. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, smoke, and a mixture of sweet and sour alcohol. Drum and bass music complemented the strobing lights as they reclined on leather sofas. The group was expanding. Jeremiah's friends had all come to celebrate his ascension. The family left Keith to introduce himself to them. Anna, his cousin, was the only one he'd met before. She wore a black dress with a plunging neckline and sleeves that stopped mid-arm. Anna greeted him warmly. "It's so good to see you, Keith. I'm a vegan too." She reached down and picked up a smoked salmon crudité. "Oh, I think that has fish on it," Keith said rapidly. "I know. Whatever is your point?" Anna said. Her warmth dissipated as she lifted her lip in disdain and turned away to speak to one of Jeremiah's friends, addressing him as Terence. Terence was trying to engage unsuccessfully with Jeremiah, who was staring at the dancers below with a stormy expression. "This won't affect the acquisition, will it? I don't need to worry, do I?" Terence tried, his oversized shirt billowing in the air conditioning. Jeremiah turned slowly. "Fuck the acquisition. This was my moment. He knew he wasn't going to pass the company on to me, and he didn't warn me. I looked like an idiot." He jabbed his finger at Harold. "Did you know about this? This calculated humiliation?" Harold shook his head. "You know what annoys me the most?" Jeremiah fumed. "Our share price has already risen. Risen! Father is a dinosaur. He completely missed Bitcoin in 2012. I've spent 6 months on the corduroy coin acquisition. We are days away from completion. If he thinks I'm going to..." He pointed at one of Terence's friend, a saggy-jowled hipster with a man bun. "Look at That. It's an author. It even made it into the New York Times bestseller category. You know how? Not because it sells books. I don't even know its name. My name is Charles X. Cross, the author offered. Don't talk to me. Literally nobody gives a fuck, Jeremiah snarled. The point is that it was an early adopter of corduroy coin. It remortgaged its mother's house and used the money to buy crypto. Now, it is a multimillionaire and can afford to buy 10,000 of its own shitty books to rot in a warehouse. Jeremiah stabbed his finger into the man's ill-fitting jacket. If idiots like that can make money, then why can't my father? Harold raised his glass. Jerry, you will be the CEO of the Lion Group. To Jerry, everyone. Everyone raised their glasses. It's fucking Jeremiah! Stay on brand, Jeremiah shouted. To Jeremiah, the group chorused. Here you go, brother. Harold passed him a silver case. It'll smooth you out. Jeremiah accepted the case and opened it. Inside was a mirrored surface, a silver cylinder, and a matching straw. He poured out a line of cocaine, and then used one of his business cards to shape it. Jeremiah rejected the silver straw. Who has a £10 note? Only rich arseholes use custom straws. £10 notes are trending right now. There was a series of headshakes around the group. Come on! I obviously don't carry cash because I'm not a fossil. I only carry 50s, Terence said apologetically. Keith coughed. I have a tenner. He proffered up a wrinkled note from his pocket. Jeremiah looked at it in horror. What is that diseased offering? Do you want to give me botulism? That's disgusting. I meant a fresh one, obviously. He picked up the silver straw and did a line, eyes flaring as the cocaine immediately hit. You've embarrassed yourself today, wuss. Learn from this. Leaning back, Jeremiah's pupils dilated. Fuck, father! Let's just have a good time, shall we? He raised his champagne and gave a toast. Fuck, father! Swigging half the glass, he giggled. A nihilistic gleam came into his eye. Fuck, father! Fuck, father! He beat on the table until everyone else took the rhythm. Abruptly, he stopped. I'll have my time, and I'll have it soon. He surged up to his feet, mania in his grin. Now, where are all the girls? Let's all have some fun. Terence spoke to one of the staff members who opened a red rope, letting up a cadre of scantily clad dancers. That's what I'm talking about. Wuss, this is London. Keith's eyes widened. The women were in tight red corsets and matching thongs. They swayed their hips to the music. Barely wearing anything, their skin glistened under the spotlight. The scent of perfumed oil was thick. Keith had experienced nothing like this before. Life was simple, back on the farm. 30th of April, 2022, London. Keith woke up on a leather sofa in Harold's penthouse off St. Catherine's Dock. His stomach roiled. His face had adhered itself to the sofa and pulled away with a sucking sound. He tried to get up but was assaulted by a wave of dizziness and nausea. He collapsed back down, breathing deeply until the feeling passed. He looked around. He was in a large open-plan living room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the yacht. A sleek black grand piano sat in the middle of the room. Keith staggered over to the window and looked outside. The sun was rising over the water. The orange light on the horizon was turning the water into a golden liquid. He watched as a man in a high-vis vest walked by, dragging a pair of wheelie bins behind him. This'll sort you out. Keith jumped. He hadn't seen Harold Chef moving around in the far side of the room where a kitchen stood. The chef cracked open a series of eggs for breakfast omelettes. The scent of strong black coffee reached him from across the room. Keith realized with horror that despite being fully clothed in his shirt and jacket, he was wearing no trousers. He looked down at his white, hairy legs. He looked around the room for them. to no avail. The chef pointed to the other side of the room, where a change of clothes was hanging. Almata put those over there for you. She's getting your clothes dry cleaned. She didn't undress me while I was sleeping, did she? Keith asked, a mounting horror building within him. The chef laughed. No, of course not. She came in and cleared up all of the mess this morning. If you wanted someone to undress you, that would have cost extra. Keith nodded, relieved. I'm still trying to figure out how everything works. I didn't grow up with all this. The chef laid out an omelette and coffee for him. He placed a small glass of thick green liquid next to it. I can't actually eat omelettes, Keith said apologetically. Harold walked in, wearing a fresh suit and wincing at the lights. Don't insult the chef, Keith. Eat the omelette and put on some damn trousers. How are you not hungover? Keith said as he sat down, the scent of food turning his stomach. Harold looked at him unimpressed. Poor people get hangovers, Keith, not the likes of us. We have cocaine. In ancient times, they prescribed it as a cure-all. If you studied history at school, you'd be okay today. Smiling sympathetically at him, he pulled out a small case similar to the one last night. If you're going to work with us, you'll need to get your own supply. Talk to Jeremiah's secretary, Susan. He offered the case to Keith. Do you have a place to live in the city? Keith shook his head, eyeing up the cocaine dubiously. Well, you can't live here. People will think you're a refugee. Jeremiah's secretary will sort you out with a hotel room. Harold picked up an espresso cup, ignoring his breakfast, and downed the coffee in one. I have a breakfast date. I'll see you in the office on Monday. He swiped back the silver case. Oh, I haven't had any. You snooze, you lose, cousin. I'm running late. Last word of advice. Never, ever show weakness to Jeremiah. In our family, we eat weak people and spit them out. We've no time for them. Harold gave him a last pat on the shoulder and swooped out of the house, leaving a stillness in his wake. Finish your breakfast and make yourself scarce, the chef said. Master Winterton will be bringing back company, and it wouldn't do for you to still be here. Keith nodded, cutting into his omelette. The centre was still runny and oozed onto the plate. The chef placed down 2 slices of granary toast with jam and picked up the omelette. They won't hear from me that you didn't eat it. Keith smiled gratefully and munched on the toast, the dry food soaking up the sour remnants of last night's drinking. His phone beeped again. Keith looked down to see 6 missed calls and 11 text messages from his mother. Finishing his jam and toast gratefully, he ignored the green smoothie. He rose and left the building. The cold air felt heavenly on his face. His phone started ringing again. Hello, Mum, he said, eyes closed and turning to face the breeze. How did it go? Did you find a job? It's not too late to apply to Sainsbury's. Desperation leaked out of her voice. I'm not working at Till, Mum. That won't do us much good. It went well with them. I think they're making me a personal assistant, Keith said. That should be enough to make the bank happy. When will you see the contract? Keith realized that one side of his face had gone numb. He poked his cheek. This was possibly the worst hangover he'd ever had. Keith, can you hear me? Sorry, Mum. Yeah, I can hear you. I'm in the office tomorrow, so I'll probably see it then. Mum, they are worse than I remember. Lots of people don't enjoy their job, Keith. Just do your best with them. Your dad crippled himself trying to keep up the mortgage payments. Keith had spied a Pratt in the distance. Don't worry, Mum. I'm going to save the farm. I have my priorities in order. Family first, Keith. I have to go, Mum, but I'll talk to you later. Give my love to Dad. Keith hung up and walked over to Pratt to buy another coffee on his credit card. Slumping down with it, he opened up an app on his phone to find a cheap local hotel. 0 results. With resignation, he increased the budget and the distance until he found a hostel in Euston. That would have to do for the night. He then realized that he had no suit trousers, just the outfit he'd borrowed from Harold. Keith loaded up his phone again, this time to find a Primark nearby. Oxford Street. He left Harold's penthouse, slumped in the lift, as he made plans to head towards the closest tube station. 2nd of May, 2022. London. On Monday morning, Keith arrived at the Lion Group head office at 8:45. His jacket was as clean as he could make it, and he sported a brand new white shirt and trousers from Primark. The clothes were a little big on him, but it was the best he could do. His heart was racing as he stepped through the door. He smoothed down his jacket and walked down the corridor to the receptionist. I have an appointment with Jeremiah? He beamed expectantly at the unimpressed secretary. She dialed a number and spoke to someone on the phone, then turned to Keith with a bored expression. There's nothing in his diary. Would you mind calling Jeremiah directly for me, please? Perhaps he just needs reminding. We had a heavy night on Friday night. She laughed at him. You want me to call up to the chief financial officer of the Lion Group? If he wanted to speak to you, it would be in his diary. Or he would have given you his number. Her colleague next to her was sanding her nails. Wait. He said I would work directly for him. Perhaps someone in HR. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The secretary looked over at the security guards near the entrance. Keith looked around, frustrated. Sir, I'm going. Keith turned and moved towards the door. I can't give up. There is too much riding on this. Keith opened his phone again and looked for the closest charity shop. He found a pair of battered Patrick O'Brien paperbacks to pass the time and nursed a coffee in Pret. He waited until 5 and then headed back to Harold's apartment. Chiming the bell, he found no one in and sat on the front doorstep reading. He munched on some sandwiches as he ploughed through his books, his earlier despondency buried beneath tales of life at sea. His mother interrupted his reading with a text. How's it going? Kiss, kiss. He deliberated, then decided to lie. Great, but really busy. Can't talk. Will phone you when I get a chance. He leaned back with his head against the door and hoped that the next time she called, the lie would have become a truth. Keith checked the time on his phone. 6. Harold must be working late. Harold didn't return until just after 10. A car pulled up outside. Keith watched as Harold staggered out of the car and down the path with a slender brunette on his arm. Keith stood up nervously. This might be awkward. What the... Keith? I'm a bit busy now, old boy. What the devil are you doing? Harold turned to the brunette and explained. This is my cousin. He's very country. He doesn't understand city life. I went to the office today and they wouldn't let me in, Keith admitted. I told them I was supposed to be working for Jeremiah, but they didn't believe me. They wouldn't even put me through to him. That's ridiculous, Harold said. Look, cousin, turn up tomorrow and show them this. It's my card. They'll let you up to see me. He looked at Keith up and down. Actually, they'll probably just think you stole it. Just make sure you're in the lobby for 8. I'll vouch for you when I get in. Don't be late. I won't hang around. The girl whispered to Harold. He shook his head. Nah, I'm not calling Susan. It'll be simpler just to sort this out in the morning. Keith held out his hand. Thank you. This means so much. Whatever you can do. Trust me, you don't want to shake these hands. Harold looked at the girl and laughed. But this is exactly what I was saying about weakness. You need to learn how the city works, and fast, Keith, or it'll spit you out. Keith nodded. I won't let you down. Harold looked at him incredulously. The audience over, he looked back at his companion. The things he says! And then opens up the door, leaving Keith outside. Keith should have bought another shirt. He'd have to wash this one in the sink. There wasn't enough time to get it laundered or replaced. How will I iron it? Grimly, he figured he'd have to stump up the credit for a travel lodge. That was an expensive mistake. Tomorrow, I'll buy a cheap iron. Picking up his books, he strode off towards the nearest travel lodge. It wasn't far, and on the way, he found a burger joint. Hot food. After a day of sandwiches, he was gasping for a decent meal. He ordered a falafel bap with chips and carried it to the hotel with him. In order to protect his clothes, he sat on the bed in his underwear and devoured it. 3rd of May, 2022, London. The next day, he approached the front desk again, this time at 7:45. The same secretary raised an eyebrow at him. "I've been asked to wait here until Harold comes in. He's going to vouch for me." "You know, if any of them wanted to see you, they could just ask their secretaries to make an appointment," she said. Keith snorted. I genuinely don't think it occurred to them. His face slipped back into a deferential expression. "They are very busy." Softness crept into the flawlessly made-up face, and the secretary gestured to the seats. "Yes, they are. You can sit over there." "Thank you." Keith didn't have long to wait. Just before 8 o'clock, Jeremiah swept in, his personal assistant following in his wake, holding a coffee. "Jeremiah, wait," Keith said, his urgency making his voice overly loud. "Wuss, what are you doing here? Why are you sitting in the cheap seats?" Jeremiah blinked incredulously and headed for the lift. Keith scampered after him. "You mentioned a job?" "Oh, yes. You were supposed to be here yesterday. Where were you still hungover from Saturday? You need to man up, wuss, if you're going to be my bitch." The lift doors opened, and Keith joined Jeremiah inside. Jeremiah pushed a button for the top floor. "Are there any more details for my job? Because I really need a contract to show the bank." Jeremiah looked at Keith. Comprehension slowly dawning. "Are you poor?" "It's for the mortgage on the farm. Dad lost his job, so I gave up college to get a job in the city." Jeremiah cut in. "Forget I asked. I don't want an audio narration of Dickens. Susan, get Wuss up here with a Band 3 job in business ops. He can get a desk near you. Find him something to do." Susan nodded obsequiously at Jeremiah, then directed a venomous glance at Keith. Great. Making friends already. Jeremiah had put his earbuds in and was gently nodding his head, presumably to some kind of music. When the lift doors opened, Jeremiah marched straight out and down the hallway to the CFO's office. The door closed behind him, leaving Keith to stand looking at it. Susan took the only chair at the desk outside. I'll just get a chair and bring it over," Keith said. "No, you won't. This is my desk." Susan thought for a moment. "You can stay in the kitchen until we found you a place to sit." "In the kitchen? What will I do? Drink coffee?" "The pastries are excellent. I'll print out some health and safety documents for you to review." Keith thanked her and walked towards the kitchen. The coffee and the pastries were delicious. After a few minutes, Harold walked in. "Keith, you made it. Good man." Harold grabbed a pastry. "Do you have a desk yet?" Not yet. No," Keith said, aimlessly following Harold out into the corridor. "Susan!" Harold called out down the corridor. "Keith's with me until he gets set up." Harold led Keith into his office. Picking up the remote, he turned on a large screen at the end of the room and switched to Netflix, watching Rick and Morty. His personal assistant arrived with a large coffee. "The apple danishes are the best." He chuckled at the television. Keith munched on a pain au chocolat, murmuring his approval. Harold's phone buzzed. Reaching down, he looked at the screen. Oh no. He barely had time to place it back on the desk before the thundering sound of bespoke shoes thudded in the hallway, and his office door burst open. Jeremiah was grinning maniacally. "Did you see Anna's text? The old goat's got COVID. He's on a ventilator." "Uncle Alfred?" Keith asked. "Who else would we give a fuck about? You know what this means." Jeremiah preened. "I am the acting CEO whilst he breathes through a tube. The deal can continue." We should visit, pay our respects," Harold whispered. Jeremiah blinked. Pay our... Harold, you absolute fanny! What part of the plague do you not get? He raced down the corridor. Susan, cancel all my meetings. Get Terence in. Arrange for a board meeting tomorrow and get some champagne. My brother's in a grump. He popped his head back into the office. Big things! This could be a sea change for the organization. His wild-eyed gaze disappeared, leaving just the television to fill the void. He'll be all right, Keith said. I know that, Harold snapped. He's a battle axe. He's the strongest man I know. His eyes didn't match the optimism of his words. They were shadowed. Susan brought in a bottle of champagne and glasses. She filled 3 of them, one of which he begrudgingly handed to Keith before leaving to carry out her orders. Jeremiah returned and raised a glass. Fuck traditional values! Here is to modernization, embracing innovation, and creating a corporate fit for the future. They clinked their glasses. Jerry, he might only be bedridden for a week or so. I wouldn't get too excited, Harold warned. Might. He might get long COVID. He might be bedridden for weeks. Jeremiah took a deep breath. He might die. Well, I hope not, Harold said. Just because you have your problems with father doesn't mean the rest of us do. I love him. And that is why he made me the heir apparent, and you are just left to rot. Father respects ambition, hunger, greed. It's what made the Lion Group. You're beat a bit submissive, Harold shouted. Enough! I am still your big brother, and I will knock you across this room. He is our father. Show some damned respect. His bulging face reddened with anger. There it is. Jeremiah raised his glass. The Winterton strength. Yes, brother! Pulling out his silver case, he racked up 3 lines. To being the most powerful family in Britain. And how exactly are you the most powerful family? Keith remained quiet. His disgust at Jeremiah had reached a new nadir as he watched him snort his line. A sudden clarity washed over him. I saw an article about corduroy coin on the BBC News this morning, Keith said. Jeremiah snorted in response. It said that it was approaching something called a 200-day death cross. It sounded bad, so I just thought I'd best let you know. Jeremiah smirked. Listen, wuss. Firstly, I don't read lamestream news. We have our own much more accurate sources of trading information. And secondly, Harold? It sounds scary, but the death cross is not necessarily a market milestone to be feared, Harold said kindly. It can precede a near-term rebound with above-average returns. It's why people often choose to buy in the dip. Don't dawdle, hodl, Jeremiah said, filling his glass. Whatever the heck that means. Thank you for explaining it to me. I thought you would know, but I just wanted to mention it, Keith said. He felt awkward. He'd gone to college for business studies. Neither that, nor his time on the farm had prepared him for the city. It was all a different language to him. What does corduroy coin actually do? He asked. What do you mean? Jeremiah said. What does it do? Like, why do people buy it instead of just putting money in a bank account or buying shares? Keith turned as Harold topped up his glass. Jeremiah looked unimpressed. It's a currency, like dollars or sterling. But you can't buy anything with it, can you? Keith asked. Well, you can, if you convert it to another currency first, Harold explained. Listen, you buy it, it rises in value, you get rich. That's the whole point of cryptocurrency. It makes you rich. Look at that ghastly slug of an author we met on Friday. Even bottom-tier pond slime's getting rich. It's a no-brainer. Jeremiah finished his glass. I need to write my speech for the board meeting tomorrow. I presume you'll be attending. Absolutely, Harold confirmed. Does he Mean me? Not you, wuss. This is for the grown-up. Now get us lattes. Double shot. Jeremiah fired at him as he left the room. Keith took a last sip of his champagne, and then went to Susan to find out exactly how and where he was to go to pay for lattes. Presumably, he'd need a card to re-enter the building. 13th of May, 2022, London. Hello, Mum. I've just emailed you my contract. You can put me down as guarantor for the mortgage, Keith proudly told her. He grinned. Yeah, it looks like a lot of money, but it's really not all that much in London. I'm still looking for an affordable flat to rent. He nodded as she praised him. I can see why we avoided them for so long. They take some getting used to. His phone bleeped. It was Jeremiah. Code red. A location ping followed it, showing a local bar. Well, yeah, gotta go, Mum. They've summoned me. Love you. See you soon. He hung up and grimaced. Time to return to the cousins. Keith picked up his jacket on his way back through the office, then headed out to find them. It didn't take long. They were in a roped-off area in a Shoreditch bar. I hate this place. Well, you chose it, Harold said, drinking his beer. It's trending at the moment. We had to come here. He sneered at the revellers, until he spotted someone aiming a phone at him. Immediately, a beaming smile split his mouth. The smile never quite made it to his eyes. The Lumineers were playing in the background. Keith nodded along amiably. Anna appeared and took a glass of Prosecco, her eyes twinkling. So then, what do you think this is all about? Jeremiah viewed her impassively until he too erupted into a grin. What's going on? Keith asked. Father has decreed that we are having an emergency meeting at that old, dank piece of shit he calls his northern pile. Jeremiah sat up straighter on the leather sofa. I think we can safely say that his recent bout of COVID has given him greater perspective over the succession. Huzzah! Harold raised his gin and tonic in a toast. Keith did the same, caught up in a moment. Well done, Jeremiah. We leave first thing tomorrow morning, Jeremiah said smugly. Of course, you'll take Keith with you, Anna said. You will? Keith said. What? Worse? To a family meeting? Fuck off. Father would tear the spineless beat-a-bitch apart. Jeremiah laughed. No offence, Keith. You remember when Father called you a vain, self-centered prick? Anna said, keeping her expression sweet and mild. Jeremiah coughed. No. Well, it's a fairly common statement from him. Perhaps he's right and you don't pay attention to what anyone else is saying, Anna commented. Bollocks! I listen. I'm listening right now. Jeremiah looked down, licking his teeth. If I brought worse, said I'd taken him under my wing and was grooming him to join the family business, then he would have to see me as empathetic. Jeremiah raised his gaze to look at Keith. Empathetic people do activities like that, don't they? Keith shifted awkwardly. I guess. Anna raised her chin triumphantly. Then it's settled. Just remember to refer to your darling and most treasured friend and cousin as Keith. Refilling his champagne, Jeremiah's expression turned sour as he contemplated Anna's words. Let's see if Father keeps his word this time, given all the sacrifices we're all making here. Jeremiah sent off a text. Keith, get to Edinburgh Airport first thing in the morning. Susan will send you the details later on tonight. Wait, how do we get to Edinburgh by 6? It's on the other side of the country. Keith loaded up Google Maps on his phone. That's about 6 hours on the sleeper train. Jeremiah snorted. Sleeper train? Nonsense. Just fly. Jeremiah, Anna said, looking pointedly at Keith. Fine. Wes, you can join us on our plane. It'll be like a field trip for you. You can gawk at the pretty flight attendants and the shiny vehicles. Jeremiah pulled a twisted impression of Keith, gasping in amazement at the sights. If he makes a mess, you can clean it up. It was your idea to bring him. Don't react. Keith put on an amiable smile, downing his champagne. He was still hungover from yesterday. This wasn't for him. His family needed the money. All he needed to do was put up with his sneering twat of a cousin and not snap his neck. He looked at his neck and fantasized about squeezing it tight, watching Jeremiah's eyes bulge. Wes, were you about to fucking kiss me? Jeremiah looked horrified. Keith blinked, shaking his head. What? No, I'm just a bit tired, zoned out. Well, zone out on someone else, you filthy deviant. Take it as a compliment, Harold suggested. I don't want to kiss anyone, Harold said angrily. I just zoned out. I said that. Anna reached over to pat him on the shoulder, before subconsciously wiping her hand on her dress. Just as well. Nobody's going to kiss a peasant. What would that be, Harold? Bestiality? Jeremiah laughed at his own joke. His phone blipped. The car's outside. Let's go. Wuss, hands to yourself. What about luggage? Keith asked. You're the luggage, Jeremiah smirked. It'll go up separately. Just get your housekeeper to pack it up for you. Susan will get it collected. I don't have a housekeeper. I'm still in a hotel, Keith said. Susan will arrange something with a concierge. It's a travel lodge. Jeremiah gagged. What is this? Les Miserables? Get in the car. You're bringing me down with your sheer fucking bleak existence. Jeremiah elbowed at Harold as they got up. Why do people choose to live like that? Keith ground his teeth and followed, like the obedient little cousin that he was. Keith's eyes bulged as the driver drove directly onto the runway and up to the plane. In the distance, he could see the familiar queue of people boarding a Boeing 747. He'd flown to Portugal once, and that was the experience that he remembered. This was something else. The attendant waited politely at the foot of the stairs to welcome him onto the small jet. I don't have my passport. Keith slapped at his pockets reflexively, even though, on an intellectual level, he knew they just held his wallet, keys, and phone. Idiot! Jeremiah walked straight on. Harold came over. Do you have a driving license? Keith nodded. Give the attendant that. She'll get it scanned and returned to you. It's only a domestic flight, so you don't need a passport. Keith breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks, Harold. The plane had the sterile scent of most aircraft. They didn't have to cover up the scent of the masses with perfume. Instead, it just had the slight metallic tang of air conditioning. Keith settled down onto one of the leather sofas as an attendant brought out champagne. He gratefully accepted a glass of bubbles and took a deep sip. The large LCD TV played music videos as the siblings pulled out their phones. Checking his own, Keith was pleasantly surprised to find that the plane had free Wi-Fi, though the definition of free probably just meant that the Lion Group was paying for it. It was past midnight when the plane arrived in Scotland. Keith had spent most of his first private plane flight asleep, but he felt better for it. Anna gestured to his chin, and he gratefully wiped off some slumber drool before the others could see it. Finishing the lukewarm remnants of his glass of champagne, he followed the boys down onto the tarmac, where a helicopter was waiting to take them on the rest of their journey to Alfred Winterton's Scottish retreat. As he clambered onto the helicopter, Keith was given headphones to block out the noise of the rotors. Banter beats, Jeremiah called them. They allowed the passengers to talk to each other during the flight. Keith didn't need that feature, though. It was staring out the window that fascinated him. His first helicopter ride was truly majestic. Even at night, maybe especially at night, Edinburgh was so beautiful. The jeweled lights of the city twinkled back at them through the darkness. When the lights fell away, it grew too dark to see much, so he reluctantly joined the others in browsing his phone. Privately, he wished he had a book with him. His mum was going to be astonished that he'd flown in a private jet and was now in a helicopter. Keith was careful to sanitize all of his messages to her. She didn't need to know the negative aspects of his new life, just the positive ones. He decided he'd call instead of texting her. He missed his home comforts. 14th of May, 2022. Castle Winterton, Scotland. There it is, the smouldering ruins of Father's favourite pad, Jeremiah muttered. Brace yourself for the cold and the damp. Keith's eyes widened. A stone castle dominated the island, silhouetted against the night sky. It rose as if chiselled from the cliffs. Its weathered and cracked facade projected power. When the helicopter landed, the exterior lights came on to greet them. A manicured path, lined with an ancient yew hedge, led up to an enormous set of iron, reinforced oak doors. Cold buffeted him, and his nostrils filled with the salty scent of brine and kelp. The windows were secured with iron bars. It was a fortress. The light somehow made it a more imposing sight. They highlighted the buttresses and accentuated them instead of banishing the shadows. He wished there had been thunder and lightning to really set the scene, but it was Scotland, so he was greeted with drizzle. The helicopter had Winterton monogrammed umbrellas, but Keith chose to stride out and enjoy the weather instead. If you want your childhood ruined, come here for your holidays, Jeremiah muttered, as he awkwardly hefted his umbrella to give him at least partial protection against the biting wind and the increasingly heavy Scottish drizzle. I liked it, Harold remembered fondly. You like everything. You're like a withered deformity with no soul. Jeremiah threw back at him, setting his shoulders as he marched through the doors. Let's see if the old goat is still up. At this hour of the night, Keith doubted it, but it certainly didn't bother him. He was looking forward to his first night's sleep in a castle bed. Visions of Errol Flynn flashed through his mind. Bet this place has chandeliers. He wasn't disappointed. The entrance foyer had an enormous crystal chandelier, framed by 2 sets of sweeping stairs. Oil paintings of long-ago worthies in kilts lined the stairwell. Are those our ancestors? Keith asked in awe. Don't be an idiot, wuss. Father's first job was on a market stall. He wasn't born to money like us, Jeremiah said airily. The housekeeper, Mr. Jones, introduced himself to Keith before addressing them. He had a bald pate and a ramrod straight posture. Welcome to Castle Winterton. Your father will greet you for breakfast at 8. Keith nodded, while silently agreeing with the swearing and groans from his cousins. They all knew where their rooms were. Keith was left to follow Mr. Jones to one of the guest rooms. Keith saw the cotton pyjamas on the bed and smiled. He normally slept in his faded underpants. Arriving a quarter of an hour early, Keith was the second person to make the breakfast table. Alfred was sitting with a black coffee reading the Times newspaper. Keith shifted awkwardly. The clothing they'd provided him fitted well enough, but the tweed jacket was causing him to sweat. Take it off, Alfred said in a gravelly tone, not raising his eyes from his paper. Keith shrugged it off and hung it on the back of his chair. The butler swooped in and took it away. Why are you here? You're one of my sister's lot, aren't you? Alfred continued. At that moment, Anna swept in. She somehow made the tweed look glamorous, an impressive achievement when wearing tight trousers and a cotton blouse. Jeremiah's taken him under his wing. Alfred looked up briefly at that before returning to his paper. The boy's an idiot. Find a new mentor. Keith didn't know what to say, so smiled amiably. Alfred slapped down his paper. Are you simple? Why don't you speak? The smile dropped from Keith's face, and he tried a more earnest expression. I'm sorry, sir, I've come to the Lion Group to learn the trade. The butler arrived and poured Keith a black coffee. Oh, do you have any soy milk? We most certainly do not, Alfred snapped. Coffee should be drunk black. Tea too. Though in the evening, it is acceptable to add bergamot and a slice of lemon in moderation. He looked into Keith's eyes. So you wanted to learn to be more like Jerry, did you? Got similar interests, have you? I've had enough of this. The veneer of politeness that Keith had maintained for the last 2 weeks cracked. My interest is helping my parents pay their mortgage. I don't give a damn about lifestyle. Idiot. He immediately regretted his temerity. If I wanted to, I could write a check that would make their mortgage go away. What would you offer for that? Alfred asked. His ice blue eyes locked on Keith's. Keith paused. That would be an act of generosity, but I'd rather learn the trade so I can write the check myself. Alfred snorted. There it is. The Winterton pride. I thought it was going extinct. He sipped his coffee. She looked down on me, your grandmother. Married well, so she did. When I needed help, she told me I should get a job instead of trying to keep my first company afloat. Alfred waved around him. All of this, born of spite, to show the hateful wretch that I survived without her. She's dead, sir, Keith said. Aye. Who do you think paid for her funeral? She pissed away her husband's fortune on sentiment and charity. I dreamt of the day she'd come to me for money. Alfred sneered. She died first. I think she'd be happy beggared, then having to admit to me that I'd made it. I'd become a success without her. The butler moved over to refill Alfred's coffee, but he was waved away. Alfred pointed at Keith. I surpassed your grandmother and left her behind, jealous and alone. With respect, sir, that's not the grandmother I knew, Keith said calmly. She was always kind to us. She was a cheerful person. She was weak! Alfred roared, slapping the paper on the table. Weak! There was an awkward silence. Anna, who both men had forgotten about, broke it. I do so love family breakfasts, she commented airily. I can't for the life of me imagine why we avoid them so. Harold was next in, dead on 8. A butler brought in Alfred's breakfast separately, a bowl of oatmeal and 3 halved quail eggs. A trolley arrived next. The trolley was loaded with several silver serving trays and a large round pan, all covered with lids. Thick granary toast filled a rack. Fill your guts, then. The 3 of them rose without waiting for Jeremiah. Keith's heart sank when he saw the food. Sausages, black pudding, bacon, fried eggs. They'd filled the large round pan with kedgeree. He took some toast and spread some jam on it. Harold loaded his plate high. Classic Atkins diet, he quipped. Anna sucked the kedgeree. Ah, yes. Vegan. At 8:15, Jeremiah arrived. Grinning widely, he helped himself to breakfast. Keith could see just how wide Jeremiah's pupils had dilated. He was clearly medicating to help himself through the morning. Alfred looked up from his oatmeal, distaste clear on his face. Playing the class clown will not hide the fact that you are late. Jeremiah settled down. He poured himself a glass of orange juice and sipped it. Is this the mixer? He grimaced. Well then, father. What is this about? What big news have you got for us? Alfred gave him an even stare. Anna's idea, really. Sometimes good ideas bubble through her liberal sympathies. Liberal? Keith watched as everyone in the room gazed unblinking at the patriarch. I need an heir to take over the Lion Group. The board is being rather insistent on a succession path. Alfred leant back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The question is, which of you men can even be a shadow of me? Jeremiah blinked. He laughed nervously. Why is it even a question? I'm the heir. You trained me to be your— Trained you, did I? Did I train you to buy fucking cryptocurrency? Alfred's eyes widened. His moustache became flecked with oatmeal as he raged. It's the future! It's trending! Jeremiah tried to say in an offhand manner, but his voice was audibly shaking. Alfred slammed his fist onto the table. He was nearly standing now. Trending? It's a fucking Ponzi scheme. You bought into an utter sham using my company's money, you utter deformity. He slumped back into his chair. When you crawled out of your mother's womb, I should have asked for a refund. He looked at Harold. Would you have bought that fucking crypto company? Harold shifted uncomfortably. With the information available at the time, I understood and supported my brother. Oh, grow a fucking spine. Answer the question, you insipid, limp-wristed fuck. Alfred shouted. No, Harold said firmly. No, I wouldn't. Jeremiah turned on him. Oh, you wouldn't, would you, you traitorous weasel? I support you for heir, Jerry. Don't worry. Harold tried to pat his brother's shoulder, but Jeremiah violently brushed off his hand. Alfred sneered. You'll do no such thing. It's my decision, not any of yours. He shook his head. No, this is what's going to happen. We'll spend the day in a period of introspection. He looked pointedly at Jeremiah. The staff will take one of the boats to the mainland. We'll reconvene at lunch, family only, with cold cuts, fish, and drinks in the drawing room. Alfred rose from his chair to leave. We don't leave the room until I've made my decision. The staff will return tomorrow. Keith didn't want to get involved, but he had to ask. Should I leave on the boat? You fucking stay. I've been more impressed by you than by any of my treacherous spawn. Alfred rose, adjusting his shirt, then left the room, leaving a seething Jeremiah to gaze malevolently in his direction. Jerry, Anna warned. Jeremiah spat onto the polished table and stormed out, kicking his chair over as he left without a word. Harold went back to the buffet and loaded more food onto his plate. Another classic Winterton breakfast. Raising his coffee in a salute to Keith, he gave a rueful smile. Welcome to the family. Now the alphas have gone to sharpen their claws, perhaps I, as the only one who appears absolutely invisible to father, could speak, Anna said. She reached for a hip flask and poured scotch into her coffee. He's even considering the grandson of his sister over me, and he hated her. Harold shrugged. You know, father, he just has some very old-fashioned— Conservative? Anna cut in. Yes, views, Harold replied limply. Anna smiled. You just let me know if you need any more synonyms for misogynistic. I know them all. Oh, come on. It's just that Jeremiah and I have worked for the Lion Group for most of our lives. You wasted your time in the charity sector. Harold looked around for the butler to get more coffee, but he disappeared with Alfred. He rose to forage on the trolley for more coffee. Anna sipped her coffee and then set the cup down with a clatter. You might have sat at the desk for longer than me, but don't think I don't know how to run a business. Harold put his hands up in surrender. Okay. I didn't mean to imply that you don't know what you're doing. I'm just saying that Jeremiah and I have more experience in the corporate world. That's all. Anna snorted. Please. You're just yes-men who do whatever father tells you to do. Jeremiah gets overly excited by whatever he reads on social media. You're not real executives. Anna gave Harold a wintry smile. Every day, I help important causes across the globe, she explained. That requires budgeting, logistics, contacts. So don't think I don't know how to run a company. This is great. I do love our family get-togethers. Harold grabbed a bottle of scotch from the side and shook its glass suggestively. But I believe some tranquility would be nice, especially as we have the family meeting from hell approaching. Oh, fuck off, Harold. Anna was staring malevolently into her coffee. Fucking off. Good luck, Keith. Harold left the room with as much grace as he could muster. Keith looked around. Finding himself alone with Anna, he reached out. If you want to... I don't, she snapped. Right then. His eyes raised as he tried to think of something to say. Well, I think I'll go for a walk around the island then. Get some sea air. Go then, she muttered, as he followed in Harold's wake. Harold walked out past the foyer with its impressive chandelier, and throwing on his jacket, walked out into the blustery island. Even with his jacket, there was a real chill in the air, but this was nothing compared to the icy bitter feuding between the Wintertons. Back on the farm, they'd argued, sure, but it had been nothing like this. Walking down to the beach, he found a lichen-covered rock to perch on. He watched the white-crested waves. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply of the salty tang, the fish-like odour of rotting seaweed. Then he cocked open one eye as a sudden thought struck him. Mum hasn't texted for a while. That's odd. Pulling out his phone, he saw there was no signal at all. The house must have Wi-Fi. He'd have to check on his return. Couldn't imagine any of the Wintertons foregoing their communications privileges. If she couldn't get hold of him, she'd only worry. The seagulls cawed and swooped in front of him, and he pulled out the second of his 2 books. The environment couldn't be any better for Patrick O'Brien's adventures at sea. His fingers braved the weather as he returned to where he'd turned over a page corner. The wind picked up, pulling at Keith's jacket and whipping the pages of his book. He turned the collar up and hunched down lower on the rock, but it did little to block out the biting cold. Keith considered going back to the house, but he knew they'd be factionalizing and wanting him to take sides. He just wanted a junior role so he could pay the mortgage. He didn't want to take his side. Keith wasn't sure what it was, but something about the island felt off. It was as if he was being watched. He looked around, trying to see if there was anyone else on the beach, but it was deserted. He was alone. The feeling grew stronger, and Keith had a sudden urge to leave. The gulls cawed mockingly at him. He looked around. There was just him on the beach. For a second, he thought he saw a shadow move. He shaded his vision with his hand, but could see nothing. Reluctantly, he tore his gaze away and checked the time on his phone. 2 hours. That's how long he'd managed. He looked down at his fingers, red and white with the cold. Sighing, he finally decided that as fun as immersive reading was, holidays in Scotland should involve more central heating and less natural elements. Sadly for him, it also meant associating with a family of scheming narcissists. Keith hid his hands deep in his pockets for the short journey back. They burned with a prickly heat as warmth and sensation returned to them. He looked back up at the castle. When he arrived, This time, he was certain someone had been watching him from the battlements. It took some fumbling for his stiff fingers to open the huge doors, but he eventually managed it. Closing them behind him, his nose and cheeks tingled in the heat. Unbuttoning his jacket, he carried it into the drawing room. Alfred was dead. Keith's hand shook as he opened the door to the drawing room. His heart beat hard in his chest as he took in the sight before him. Alfred's body hung from the light fitting, his tongue swollen and black. His eyes were bulging from their sockets, and his face was a mottled purple. Keith felt sick to his stomach, and he had to fight the urge to vomit. He stumbled backwards, tripping over a chair in his haste to get away from the body. He hugged his jacket tightly to his chest, gasping for air. His hands were shaking as he tried to pull out his phone to dial 999. His fingers slipped on the buttons, and he had to try 3 times before he finally got it right. No signal. Fuck! Keith? What is it? Anna was at the top of the stairs. She raced down and pushed past him. Father! She turned to Keith. Get the others. We have to get him down. What's going on now? Harold stomped downstairs. I was napping. The bottle of scotch in his hand was half full. Keith looked at him, open-mouthed. He's dead. Harold stopped on the stairs and gawped, not comprehending. What? Help me! Anna shouted. Keith turned back and raced into the drawing room, where Anna was trying to untie the rope. He ran forward and pulled on it, hoisting Alfred's body up higher and giving Anna more slack. Between them, they managed to get Alfred's body down and lay him on the ground. What happened? Harold demanded, staggering into the room. I don't know, Keith said, his voice shaking. I found him like this. Anna put her hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. Father, she whispered. With Alfred's body now lying on the ground, Keith and Anna could see the full extent of the damage. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, and his face was swollen and discoloured. We need to call an ambulance, Keith said, his voice shaking. And the police. Anna nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, quite. She reached for her phone, but just like Keith's, there was no signal. Damn it! She swore. Where's Jeremiah? Harold's voice was cold. You don't think? Anna stared. What? You think that Father committed suicide? Harold said in disgust. He's never given up on anything in his life. Keith lifted the head. There was a blood stain on the back of it. That's not from suicide. Someone murdered him. Get off him. I need to think. Harold paced up and down. Don't think, Harold. You're not good at it. Just get on the landline. 999. And Keith, stop getting your fingerprints all over him. Anna directed, taking charge. Keith dropped Alfred's head like it was a snake. Shit. I didn't think about fingerprints. Don't drop Father, you idiot. Look, just go find Jeremiah. He needs to know. Keith stayed. What if... He stopped himself from saying it, just staring at Anna knowingly. Right. I suppose it isn't above the little shit to do too much coke and snap. Harold came in, his eyes wide. The landline's off. No power either. Gun rack, Anna ordered, just in case. Then we find Jeremiah and let him know a murderer is on the island. Harold led them towards Alfred's study. Father's Purdy is in here. He tried the door, then shoulder-barged it. The stubborn oak wouldn't yield, even to his sizable frame. He tried again. Try holding the handle down when you do it, Keith said. Anna suggested. The police! Kick it! Do that! Enraged, Harold charged one last time, and with a loud crack, the wood around the lock split, letting them into the mahogany-panelled office. The gun rack was in the far corner of the room, behind Alfred's desk. It was a large locked piece, made of dark wood and glass, holding an ornate shotgun. Harold went to it, picking up a bust of Alfred. He smashed it through the glass and took out the gun and ammunition. Keith looked out into the corridor nervously. Well, if Jeremiah wants to be found, he can't have not heard us. Harold was breathing heavily as he cracked open the breech and opened up the ammunition box. He pulled 2 shells from the wooden holes and loaded the shotgun. He took another handful and put them in his trouser pockets. Anna took several of the shells and filled her jacket pockets. They made their way into the corridor. There was still no sign of Jeremiah. He could be off doing drugs somewhere, Harold said bitterly, the shotgun couched in his shoulder. Or he could be dead too, Keith said darkly. Harold just shook his head. I don't know. Maybe he knows we're looking for him. The whole island must know by now, Anna muttered. Let's split. Nope, Harold and Keith said in unison. We're not splitting up, Harold said firmly. We need to stay together. But what if Jeremiah's in danger? Anna asked. We don't know that, Keith replied. For all we know, he could be the one that killed Alfred. He's our brother. He could be being hunted right now, Harold interjected. Anna shook her head. Or the little psycho finally snapped. Figured if he killed father and made it look like a suicide, he could be CEO. Harold was slamming open the bedroom doors, one by one, and calling for Jeremiah. He paused to look at Anna. Jeremiah is many things, but he is not a murderer. It didn't take long to clear the first floor. Battlements, Harold ordered. Trying the turret door, he found it locked. Keith suddenly swore. Wait, I thought I saw someone watching me from up there. Doesn't matter. Harold looked at the door, and then at the gun. Hold this. He handed it to Keith. Do you know how to fire one of those? Anna asked, following Keith up the stairs. Keith shook his head. I've been hunting grouse since I was a teen. She held out her arms expectantly. He nodded and handed it over, as Harold thudded into the door again. Give me some space. She shouldered the shotgun and aimed it at the door. Keith took 2 steps back. Stop crowding me, Keith. Frustrated, Keith backed all the way to the staircase. Anna pulled the trigger. Harold's head exploded like a burst wine sack. She spun, but Keith was already running down the stairs. An explosion sounded, followed by a barrage of wooden splinters as the banister erupted. Fuck, fuck, fuck! He wasn't thinking as adrenaline took him out the front door. Behind him, he heard her cracking open the breech. He wrestled the door open. And that, Keith, is how one correctly fires a shotgun, Anna quipped. Keith slammed the door behind him. It shuddered under the impact of another shotgun blast. Running as fast as he could down the stone pathway, past the yew hedge, Keith's heart was pounding in his chest. Flinging open the gate, Keith leapt to one side and ran with his head low along the side of the dry stone walls. Door's locked, Keith, Anna shouted. He turned the corner and waited as he got his breath under control. He heard her open the gate latch and creep along the wall towards the rear of the castle. I'm actually pleased that you're still alive. I liked you, Keith. But this is the only way they'd ever let me run the company. All the other males in the line of succession have to go. Even you. She's insane. I'm going to be the heroic survivor, you see. I'll tell them that when you found out you were due to inherit if we died, you tried to murder us. She attempted a parody of his accent. Oh, mortgages, they ail me. Dear mother can't afford tofu. Keith saw a boathouse down by the shore. If he found a boat inside, he could head for the mainland. He ran forwards, vaulting over another dry stone wall, zigzagging to make himself a harder target. He could see the boathouse down below, and he redoubled his efforts, pumping his legs as fast as he could. "It's a very small island, Keith. Why didn't you save us both from getting cold?" "Shut up!" His lungs were bursting when he reached the boathouse. The cold air burnt as he gulped it down. The boathouse door was unlocked, and he swept it up before screaming. "Jeremiah!" He was hanging from the rafters. His glasses crunched on the floor beneath him as he gazed unseeing past Keith. "There you are. Trying for the boat, are you? It needs an ignition key." He looked around. So close. There were tiny emergency oars, but she would just shoot him from the shore. In the movies, there would be a flare gun, or a boat hook, or a harpoon. Keith watched as Anna booted open the boathouse door. Rising up from the rocks behind her, he brought a large grey stone down onto her skull. It crunched under the impact, and she sagged to the floor without a murmur. Picking up the shotgun, he threw it to one side. Rifling in her pockets, he found several keys. Tossing the gun into the boat, he jumped in. Untying the mooring ropes, Keith fumbled with the keys. His cold, stiff fingers wrestled with them in the ignition as he tried them each. Swearing repeatedly, he discarded them one by one until one finally slid in. The engine gave a throaty roar and engaged. He breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God. Reaching for the throttle, he pushed it forward. The engine kicked in. Just at that moment, the boat rocked violently and he was thrown to one side. It was Anna. She was still alive. She leapt into the boat, her head bleeding profusely. Her hair flew wildly as she punched him in the face, sending him reeling. Reaching out desperately, he grabbed her jacket as he fell back into the cold Scottish sea, dragging her with him. The shock of the water caused Keith to exhale, and the two of them sank into the deep harbour water in a cloud of bubbles. Pain lanced into his side, and the water turned red. He reached down to grip her wrist. A knife was in her hand, embedded in his thigh. They burst up together. Keith struggled to take a deep breath when Anna head-butted him. He went under. Spots flashed in his vision. Kicking with his legs, he fought his way through the water to precious oxygen. Through the churning waters, he glimpsed her eyes. They were wide with fury. She hissed at him through gritted teeth. "Stop!" he screamed. They both went under again. Keith was trying to push the knife away from him when the waves slammed the pair of them against a harbour piling. He felt the knife strike home. Clinging tightly to her, it took a moment to realize what he'd done, that the impact had driven it into her. Their heads rose out of the water, gasping for air, still rammed up against the piling, pressed against each other. "I'm so sorry," he gasped. One of his hands was still on her knife hand. The other reached up and pushed her head under the water. He felt her cling and try and climb up his thick, sodden tweed jacket as they kicked to reach the surface. Anna turned limp in his arms. Those eyes, once full of baleful energy, now gazed up at him, dull and lifeless. He didn't know how long he'd held her under before he released her drowned body. She sank into the watery depths, her pale face fading into the dark. Gasping for breath, he swam for the boat. Keith was still shivering as he gripped the dinghy's controls and steered the boat away from the island. He could see the small stone buildings in the distance on the mainland. "All I wanted was an entry-level desk job," Keith sobbed. I just wanted to work off my parents' mortgage. I don't need riches. The icy wind whipped at his face and made his eyes water further. His shirt rubbed his skin and drew blood from his flayed side. The pain etched a grimace on his cracked lips. He held the throttle all the way open, pressed firmly in his hand, and prayed that he wouldn't die before he made it to the mainland. Thank you for listening. To get notified every time a new episode is released, please click follow or subscribe and turn on all notifications. If you enjoyed this episode, then please take a moment to rate Newton's Macabre Tales. Reviewing allows the podcast to grow.